Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Bacon. Welcome to the show, y'all. Some houses are just wood and nails. Others are built out of secrets. And the secrets they keep in the basement, they got a way of seeping up through the floorboards. This is a story about a house like that. A rundown, forgotten little spot on a dead-end street. The kind of a place the rest of the world just looks past. But in the world of the streets, it was a bank, a fortress, the trap house. It was run by a man named Ghost. He wasn't a kingpin, he was a manager, a quiet and efficient and ruthless man who ran one of the biggest crack operations in the city. He was a man who believed in two things, profit and discipline, and he enforced both with a quiet and brutal hand. His crew was a collection of a young and hungry and desperate kids who had been forgotten by the world and who had found a new and dangerous kind of a family in the game. And at the top of that food chain, right under Ghost, were two young lieutenants, Jamal and Dante. Jamal was the fire. He was a natural-born soldier, a man who moved through the world with a restless and violent energy. He was loyal to a fault, and his loyalty to Ghost was a thing of a pure and absolute and unquestioning faith. Dante was the ice. He was the thinker, the strategist, the one who saw the angles, the one who kept the books. He was in the game, but he wasn't of the game. He was a man with a quiet and secret ambition, a man who was always looking for a way to the top. They were a perfect team, Jamal and Dante, the muscle and the mind. They were the two and brightest stars in Ghost's small and violent galaxy. But there was a tension between them, a quiet and unspoken rivalry. They were brothers in arms, but they were also competitors. The story starts on a hot and sticky Tuesday night. A big shipment had just come in, and the trap house was buzzing, a hive of a quiet and frantic activity. The basement was the heart of the operation, the place where the product was cut and bagged and bundled, the place where the money was counted, the place where the secrets were kept. Ghost was a careful man. He didn't trust banks. He didn't trust technology. He trusted the cold and hard and tangible reality of a cash. And he kept a lot of it in that basement, in a hidden safe behind a false wall. $250,000, the crew's emergency fund, a treasure buried in the heart of their own and dirty kingdom. Only 3 people knew about that safe: Ghost, Jamal, and Dante. That night, as the crew was working, a new and unfamiliar face showed up at the house. A junkie, a stranger, his eyes wide with a desperate and twitchy hunger. He was looking to score. The rules of the trap house were simple. No new faces, no strangers. It was a closed and quiet and disciplined operation. Jamal, the soldier, was about to throw the junkie out, but Dante, the thinker, stopped him. He saw something in the junkie's eyes, a flicker of a fear that was not the fear of a simple addict. It was the fear of a man who was being watched. He pulled Jamal aside. "Something ain't right," he whispered. "This dude is a cop, or he's working for him." Jamal looked at him, his own eyes a mix of a surprise and a suspicion. "How you know?" "I just know," Dante said. "I can feel it." He was a man who had a gift for seeing the cracks in people. And this junkie was a cracked and shattered and transparent piece of glass. They took him to the basement, the place where the secrets were kept. And the questions began. Quiet at first, then harder, and then the violence. The junkie broke, as they always do. He confessed. He was a confidential informant. He had been sent in to make a buy to be the eyes and ears for a coming raid. He had just signed his own and final death warrant. Ghost was called. He came down to the basement, his face a mask of a cold and quiet and absolute fury. He looked at the broken and weeping man on the floor, and he looked at his 2 lieutenants. "Handle it," he said, his voice a low and final thing, and he walked out. Jamal the soldier knew what that meant. It was an execution, a necessary and brutal piece of a housekeeping. He pulled his gun, but Dante stopped him. "Not like this," he said. He was thinking. He was seeing the angles. A body in the basement was a problem, a messy and permanent and potentially and fatally traceable problem. But a live informant was an opportunity, a chance to play a different and more dangerous and more profitable game. A game of a misdirection, of a betrayal, of a quiet and brutal and beautiful double cross. The two brothers, the fire and the ice, were about to have their first and most fateful disagreement. A disagreement that was going to end in a quiet and dark and bloody trap house basement. "We can use him," Dante said, his voice a low and urgent whisper in the tense and bloody basement. Jamal looked at him like he was crazy. "Use him? He's a rat, Dante. You know the rule. We cut off the head of the snake." It was the old code, the simple and brutal and unwavering logic of the streets. A snitch was a cancer, and you cut it out before it spread. But Dante saw a different angle. "Think about it, Jamal," he said, his mind racing, the pieces of a new and more intricate puzzle clicking into place. "The cops are watching us. They're planning a raid. And this dude, he's their eyes. What if we give him something to see? Something that ain't real?" It was a brilliant and dangerous idea, a double cross. They would feed the informant false information. They would send the cops on a wild goose chase to a fake stash house, a fake deal. And while the cops were busy chasing ghosts, they would move their real operation, their real money, to a new and safer location. It was a classic and high-stakes game of a misdirection. Jamal was a soldier, not a strategist. He saw the world in black and white, good guys and bad guys, loyal soldiers and traitors. And the man on the floor was a traitor. His instinct was to end it, clean, simple. But Dante was persuasive. He painted a picture of a victory that was not just about a survival, but about a humiliation. A way to not just beat the cops, but to make a fool of them. And that appealed to the street pride in Jamal. They went to Ghost with the plan. Ghost, a man who appreciated the quiet and intricate beauty of a good calm, was intrigued. He saw the brilliance of it, and he saw the risk. But he also saw the ambition in Dante's eyes, and he was a man who believed in nurturing ambition. He agreed. So the game began. They kept the informant, the junkie, in the basement, a prisoner in their own and secret jail. And they started to feed him a story. A beautiful and intricate and completely and utterly false story. They let him overhear conversations about a new and major shipment. They let him see a map to a new and secret stash house. They were building a whole and fictional world for him. And he, in his own and desperate and terrified need to survive, was eating it up. He was their puppet now, and he was singing their song to his handlers. The cops were building a case, a big one, on a foundation of a pure and unadulterated bullshit. It was a masterpiece of a deception. But in the quiet, intense, and paranoid days of the con, a new and more dangerous dynamic started to emerge. The rivalry between Jamal and Dante. Jamal saw Dante's brilliance, his strategic mind, and he saw a threat. He was a soldier, a man of action, and he saw Dante, the thinker, the talker, as a different and more subtle and in some ways more dangerous kind of a player. And Dante saw the writing on the wall. He knew that the world of the streets was changing, that the old code of a brute force was dying, and that the future belonged to the men who could think, who could strategize, who could play the long game, men like him. And he saw Jamal as a relic of a past that was holding them back. The two brothers, the fire and the ice, were on a collision course, and the informant in the basement, the pawn in their game against the cops, was about to become a pawn in a new and more deadly game. A game for the soul of the crew. A game for the crown. The night of the fake deal was a masterclass in the street theater. The cops, armed with the informant's intel, had a full-scale tactical team surrounding a deserted warehouse on the other side of town. They were ready for a war. They were expecting a multi-million-dollar drug deal. And what they found was a warehouse full of a dust and the rats, and a single and boombox playing a loop recording of a men arguing. They had been played beautifully. While the cops were chasing Ghost, Ghost's crew was on the move. They cleaned out the trap house, the drugs, the money, the guns. They were a silent and efficient and disciplined team of movers erasing their own history. Dante was the architect of the move, the chess player. Jamal was the enforcer, the man on the ground, making sure it all went smooth. They were a perfect team on the surface, but underneath, the cracks in their brotherhood were turning into a chasm. After the move was complete, they were left with one and final problem. The informant, the man in the basement. He had served his purpose. He was a loose end. Jamal, the soldier, knew what had to be done. The rule was simple. You cut off the head of the snake. But Dante had other plans. We can't kill him, Jamal, he said. A body is a problem, a messy and permanent problem. So what do we do? Jamal asked. Just let him go. No, Dante said, a slow and cold and calculating smile on his face. We make him disappear. We send him on a one-way trip out of state. We give him a new name, a new life. We turn him from a liability into a ghost. It was a smart move, a clean move, but it was a move that went against every instinct in Jamal's body. The street code demanded a blood for a betrayal, and Dante was trying to rewrite the rules. They took the argument to Ghost, and Ghost, a man who appreciated the clean and quiet and intellectual beauty of Dante's mind, sided with him. The informant would live, he would be sent away. And in that moment, in that quiet and final decision, Jamal knew. He was losing, not just the argument, but the war. The war for Ghost's ear, the war for the future of the crew. The thinker was beating the banger, and the resentment in his heart, the quiet and simmering jealousy, turned into a cold and hard and absolute resolve. If he was going to survive in this new world, he was going to have to start thinking like a different kind of a soldier who knew that the most dangerous enemy is not the one on the other side of the gun, but the one who is standing right next to you, the one who calls you brother. The plan to make the informant disappear was a quiet and brutal and efficient piece of a logistics. Dante was the architect. Jamal was the muscle. Two brothers working together, but now with a new and cold and dangerous distance between them. They drove the informant, a broken and weeping man, out to a deserted stretch of a highway in the middle of the night. They gave him a bus ticket to a city 1,000 miles away, a new ID and a few $1,000s. You disappear, Dante told him, his voice a cold and final thing. You forget who you are. You forget who we are. You ever come back here, you ever talk to anyone, and we will find you, and we will finish what we started in that basement. The man ran, a ghost, disappearing into the darkness. And as they drove back to the city, a new and heavy and suffocating silence filled the car. Jamal was a man at war with his own and obsolete code. He had been raised to believe in a simple and brutal and absolute kind of a justice, and Dante had just rewritten the rules. He had shown him a new and quieter and more effective kind of a power. And Jamal, in his own and desperate and prideful way, knew that he had to adapt or he would die. He started to watch Dante, not as a brother, but as a rival. He studied his moves, his methods. He started to think like him, to see the angles, the long game. He was a soldier learning the art of a war from his own and most dangerous enemy. And Dante was a man who was flying too close to the sun. His victory over the cops, his brilliant and successful con, had made him arrogant. He believed he was invincible, untouchable. He started to make moves without consulting Ghost to build his own and quiet and secret power base within the crew. He was a prince who was getting ready to make a move for the throne. Ghost, the old king, saw it all. He was a master of the game, and he saw the two and brightest stars in his own and violent galaxy on a collision course. He didn't try to stop it. He just watched. It was the way of the world, the way of the streets, the young lions coming for the old one, and he was ready. He was going to let them fight it out, and he was going to stand with the one who was left standing. It was a cold and brutal and pragmatic calculus of a power, and it was a calculus that was about to be solved in a final and bloody and devastating equation. The final confrontation between the two brothers, the fire and the ice, did not happen in a loud and public explosion of a violence. It happened in a quiet and cold and bloody whisper. Jamal had been watching Dante, learning, waiting, and he had found a weakness, a secret. Dante had been skimming, not a lot, just a little from every deal. A quiet and disciplined and arrogant siphoning of the crew's profits. He was building a war chest for the day when he would make his move against Ghost. Jamal had the proof, a secret ledger, a paper trail. He had learned from the master. He had used Dante's own and quiet and methodical tactics against him. He didn't go to Ghost with the information. That was the old way, the soldier's way. He went to Dante. He cornered him in the new trap house, a quiet and anonymous apartment on the other side of town. He laid the ledger on the table between them, a quiet and devastating accusation. "I know what you've been doing, Dante," he said, his voice a low and cold and unfamiliar thing, "and now you're going to work for me." It was a coup, a silent and brutal and brilliant coup. He was not just taking over the operation, he was taking over the man. Dante looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not the hot-headed soldier, but a cold and ruthless and brilliant player. He had underestimated him. And in this game, that is a fatal and final mistake. He had a choice. He could go to Ghost, and they would both be killed, or he could become a puppet, a ghost in his own and form an operation with Jamal pulling the strings. He chose to live. But Jamal was not his brother anymore. He was a new and more brutal kind of a king. And he knew that a snake, even a defanged one, is still a snake. He couldn't just have Dante as a puppet. He had to make him disappear. He had to take him off the board, permanently. He made a call, an anonymous tip, to the same cops that Dante had so brilliantly played. He gave them a name and a location, and a story. A story about a man who was the real mastermind behind the city's drug trade. A man who was about to receive a massive and illegal shipment of cash. It was a perfect and brutal and poetic act of a revenge. He was using Dante's own and brilliant and cold tactics to destroy him. The cops hit the apartment. They found Dante there with a bag full of cash that Jamal had planted. And they found the ledger, the one that detailed not just Dante's skimming, but the entire and sordid history of Ghost's operation. Dante was caught, red-handed. He looked at his brother, at the man who had been his brother, and he saw a stranger, a cold and ruthless and brilliant king. The student had become the master, and the master was about to be sent to a cage of his own and final making. The arrest of Dante was a quiet and efficient affair. The feds had their man, the supposed mastermind of the city's drug trade, and they had the evidence to bury him. The ledger, a perfect and detailed and devastating roadmap of a criminal enterprise. Dante knew he was done. He was a chess player who had been caught in a brilliant and fatal checkmate. He didn't fight, he didn't talk, he just accepted. He had lived by the sword of his own and brilliant and ruthless mind. And now he was dying by it. The trial was a formality. The ledger was the star witness. And Dante was sentenced to life in a federal supermax facility. No possibility of parole. The thinker, the strategist, the man who was always 2 steps ahead was going to die in a cage. And Jamal was the new king. He had taken over the operation with Ghost's quiet and impressed and wary blessing. He had won. He had taken everything from his brother, his power, his position, his life. But it was a hollow and empty victory. He would sit in his quiet and new and powerful office, and he would be haunted by the ghost of the boy who had once been his brother, haunted by the memory of a blood oath made on a rooftop a lifetime ago. He had won the game, but he had lost his own and only an irreplaceable soul. In this story, the story of the blood in the trap house basement, it's a story about the brutal and unforgiving nature of the game. A game that will take 2 boys closer than brothers and turn them into mortal enemies. A game that has no room for a love, for a loyalty, for a code. A game that has only one and simple and brutal rule: survive at any cost. Jamal had survived. He had won. But he was a king in a kingdom of ghosts. And he was the most haunted of them all. A boy who had killed his own brother, not with a gun, but with a whisper. A whisper that would echo in his own and empty heart for the rest of his quiet and lonely and victorious and ultimately and profoundly and tragically damned life. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.